In 1909, a newspaper claimed America's greatest ancient discovery was found, then erased. In the next few minutes, we will trace a buried city, a sacred emergence myth, and a century of silence that refuses to end. We are starting right away with the day it all began. April 5th, 1909, Phoenix, Arizona. A front-page headline promises to rewrite history itself. The Arizona Gazette announces explorations inside the Grand Canyon, and the man behind them is about to become either a forgotten hero or history's most successful liar. His name is G. Kincaid, a prospector drifting the Colorado River alone, searching for minerals in the shadow of Marble Canyon. But minerals are not what he finds. High above the water, somewhere between 1,400 and 2,000 feet, up a sheer rock face, he sees something the canyon should not have. Stains, patterns, marks that erosion does not make. He climbs, and at the top he finds an opening that looks less like a wound in the rock and more like a door. Chiseled, deliberate, built. That door leads somewhere no textbook has ever described. A hallway stretching nearly a mile into the earth, branching into chamber after chamber, like spokes on a buried wheel. Enough space, the article claims, to shelter 50,000 people underground. But that is only the beginning. Inside, the story escalates fast. Granaries packed with ancient seed, metal workshops, vases of copper and gold shaped by hands, using a hardened alloy modern historians cannot place. Hieroglyphics line the walls, and they are compared point blank to the writing of ancient Egypt, thousands of miles from the Nile, in the middle of the American desert. And then the detail that turns a strange discovery into an impossible one. A shrine chamber, a massive stone statue seated cross-legged, holding a lotus in each hand. The unmistakable posture of Buddha, carved into an Arizona cliff face decades before anyone in America had reason to know what that posture meant. Yet even that is not the real shift, because past the shrine lies a crypt. Rows of mummies, all adult males, wrapped in a strange, dark material, unlike anything from local burial traditions. The article does not hedge. It declares this the link that could finally connect ancient Egypt to Arizona soil. Kincaid, the story goes, shipped samples straight to the Smithsonian Institution, to a Professor S.A. Jordan, who is already funding the operation in secret. A scientific team is dispatched. Kincaid himself warns that the land is federal and no one will be allowed near it. Then the trail goes cold. No follow-up story, no photographs, no official record. A find massive enough to rewrite American prehistory simply stops existing in print. But the next thread moves the scale entirely, because this was not the only story about a hidden world beneath that canyon. Long before Kincaid, the Hopi people called this place Ungtupka, one of the most sacred sites in their entire cosmology. Not a landscape, a point of origin. Hopi tradition holds that their ancestors climbed into this world, the fourth world, through a sacred portal called the sipapu, a physical location believed to sit near where the Colorado and Little Colorado rivers meet. The same stretch of canyon Kincaid claimed to be exploring. Hopi oral history speaks of vast underground realms, a great underworld inside the canyon, home to the peaceful people of one heart before conflict pushed them upward into the light. Stories of the ant people, protective beings who sheltered the Hopi in deep caverns during ages of catastrophe. Set beside the 1909 article, the overlap feels almost too precise to be coincidence. A city underground, a sacred region, an emergence from below, and that changes everything for believers chasing this story, because to them the Hopi legends are not metaphor. They are memory, proof, they argue, that something physical once stood exactly where the newspaper said it did. But here is where the narrative starts to buckle under its own weight. Hopi cultural leaders and scholars have been direct about this for years. Their traditions are spiritual, not architectural blueprints. The sipapu is a symbol of emergence into being, not a doorway into a gold-lined, mummy-filled metropolis borrowed from another continent. Folding a 1909 newspaper hoax into genuine Hopi belief does not add credibility to the hoax. It erases the actual meaning of a living sacred tradition to prop up a fictional story about foreign settlers and buried treasure. Because what comes next is larger still. If the discovery was real, why has silence held for over a century? The Smithsonian Institution has answered that question the same way every time it has been asked. No records of Professor S.A. Jordan, no employment history for G.E. Kincaid, no documentation of any excavation anywhere near the Grand Canyon matching that description. As far as the institution is concerned, the story is fiction. To conspiracy researchers, that flat denial is not closure, it is confirmation. Why, they ask, would a national institution spend 100 years denying a claim from one small regional paper if there was nothing to hide? The suspicion deepens fast. In 1908, a year before the article runs, President Theodore Roosevelt designates the Grand Canyon a national monument. By 1919, it becomes a national park. Official history frames this as conservation. Skeptics of that framing ask whether it was also a convenient way to lock the land down before anyone else could go looking. Even today, large sections of the canyon remain off limits. Officially, that is about safety, ecological protection, and honouring sacred tribal land. But believers in the cover-up point directly at the confluence of the Colorado and Little Colorado, the exact region tied to Kincaid's claim, and note, it carries some of the tightest restrictions in the entire park. Add federal no-fly zones over the canyon, publicly justified by noise control and safety, and a pattern starts to take shape for anyone already looking for one. Discovery, denial, federal seizure of the land, restricted airspace, each piece alone means nothing. Stacked together, they start to look, at least on the surface, like design rather than accident. But the next number moves the scale in the opposite direction, because pulling on this thread does not strengthen the conspiracy, it unravels it. Go back to that original April 1909 article. A discovery this significant should have dominated every newspaper in the country within days. It did not. Research into the period shows the story barely travelled past its home market. The Arizona Gazette was known, like many frontier papers of that era, for running sensational tales to move copies on a slow news week. And G.E. Kincaid himself. No census record, no employment file, no independent trace of the man anywhere outside the article that claims to describe him. The same is true of Professor S.A. Jordan, his supposed Smithsonian sponsor. Every piece of evidence for these men originates from the single document trying to prove they existed, which means the Smithsonian's denial is not a cover-up, it is simply accurate. There are no records of these people or this expedition because the expedition, in all likelihood, never happened. Even the article's own wording gives it away, referring to the Smithsonian Institute rather than its correct name, the Smithsonian Institution. A mistake an actual affiliated researcher would be unlikely to make. Historians who have studied the piece largely agree it reads as a hoax, quite possibly the work of a known frontier hoaxer of the era named Joe Mulhattan. The national park status came from a genuine, well-documented conservation movement. The access restrictions match standard wilderness protection policy used across dangerous and ecologically fragile terrain nationwide. There was no buried Egyptian city to hide, and yet the story never dies. That is the real transformation here. Over a century later, it thrives online, carried forward by a cultural undercurrent of distrust toward institutions and a hunger for a past larger than the one we were taught. It slots neatly into broader alternative history frameworks, including theories proposing an advanced global civilization lost to the last ice age. Mainstream archaeology rejects these claims for lack of supporting evidence, but the framework alone makes a story like Kincaid's feel plausible to a modern audience already primed to distrust the official record. Every denial from the Smithsonian becomes, in this telling, further proof of guilt. That is how the myth sustains itself, not through evidence but through the shape of the argument itself, one that treats absence of proof as evidence of concealment. The canyon's real history only adds fuel. Genuine sacred sites, petroglyphs, and ancestral Puebloan ruins are scattered throughout it. People have lived there for thousands of years. 19th century mapmakers gave many landmarks Egyptian and Hindu names: Isis Temple, Tower of Ra, Shiva Temple, chosen purely for their exotic sound. Yet those names still feed the illusion of a hidden connection that was never actually there. The final and most powerful reason this story survives is that it fuses a lie with a truth. It takes a fabricated 1909 tale of Egyptian artifacts and mummies and merges it with the real, sacred, living tradition of the Hopi people. That fusion gives the hoax a borrowed authenticity it has never earned. The genuine Hopi story, one of emergence, sacred land, and spiritual continuity, is far more profound than any tale of gold and lotus flowers. And yet, that authentic tradition has been quietly hijacked for over 100 years to sell a piece of frontier fiction. So the trail runs from a newspaper headline, through a sacred emergent story, into the architecture of modern conspiracy culture, and back out the other side as myth. The evidence points clearly in one direction. There is no credible trace of Kincaid or his cave. There is no documented cover-up. What survived for over a century is a story, nothing more, but a story that reveals something real about us, about why we want to believe power is hiding something greater than what we've been shown. The Grand Canyon does not need a fictional Egyptian city to hold ancient secrets. It already holds the true history of the ancestral Puebloans, the Paiute, the Havasupai, and the Hopi. It already holds the sipapu, the sacred place of emergence into the fourth world. Those are the real discoveries. If this pulled you in, like the video, share it with someone who loves a good mystery, and drop a comment below. Was it buried, or was it never there to begin with? Tell us what you believe. Perhaps the deepest secret of the Grand Canyon was never something hidden underground. It was something real, sacred and honest, hiding in plain sight the entire time.